I am 62 years old today. I sit in a house that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime, a masterpiece of Connecticut modernism, all floor-to-ceiling glass and weeping concrete. From the outside, it is the pinnacle of the American dream. People drive by our long, winding driveway and wish for my life. They see the manicured lawn, the architectural elegance, and the polished reputation of my husband, Stephen. They see a good life. But inside, the air tastes like stale bread and centuries-old water. There is no oxygen here. This house is a claustrophobic vacuum, a sterile box where dreams go to be archived, not lived. My name is Haven. I spent 30 years as the curator of this museum of hollow perfection. I kept the marble floors polished enough to see my own reflection, a reflection that grew thinner and more transparent with every passing year. I thought I was practicing sabar, the holy, enduring patience we are taught is the highest virtue for a wife. I thought that if I absorbed the bitterness, the home would remain sweet for my children. I was wrong. I wasn't building a sanctuary. I was building a gilded cage. I realize now that this house was never a home. It was a grave with a TV. I remember when we first moved here. I was an architect then. I looked at these blueprints and saw open concepts and natural light. I didn't see the iron bars or the pitted concrete that would eventually form the psychological walls of my life. I didn't know that Stephen would use my own career, my own passion for structure, to build a prison where he was the only one with the keys. Stephen, the man the world knows as a pillar of the community, a senior partner at a firm that makes men tremble, didn't start our marriage with a scream. He started with a whisper. He was two-faced, charming and generous in public, but cold and controlling the moment the deadbolt clicked shut. This is what I call the slow poison. It started with micro comments disguised as concern. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? People might think you've lost your grip," he'd say with a pitying smile. He didn't use a fist. He used narrative gaslighting. He would insist that my memory of an event was wrong, that I was too sensitive or dramatic. I remember a dinner party 5 years ago. I was discussing a new urban development project in the city. I was articulate. I was alive. Stephen waited until there was a lull in the conversation. Then he reached over, patted my hand, and laughed softly. "Haven has such a great imagination," he told our guests. But since her little episode last year, we try to keep her focused on the garden. "Stress isn't good for her memory, is it, darling?" The table went silent. I felt the blood rush to my face. There had been no episode, only a day when I was tired. But he had implanted a false memory in front of everyone I respected. When we got home, I confronted him. He didn't yell. He just looked at me with an air of utter superiority. "I never said that, Haven. You're imagining things again. You're being paranoid." This is the clinical anatomy of gaslighting. It is the systematic denial of a person's reality until they start to wonder if they are crazy. He would deflect responsibility and play the victim, telling me, "If you weren't so difficult, I wouldn't have to manage you this way." Over 3 decades, this psychological force eroded my self-schema, the very mental framework I used to understand who I was. I became a shadow of myself, a woman who checked the weather 3 times because she didn't trust her own eyes to see the rain. In high-status marriages like ours, the walls aren't built of stone. They are built of privacy. Stephen didn't forbid me from seeing my family. He simply made it inconvenient. He would manufacture a crisis every Thanksgiving or claim my sister was volatile and brought bad juju into our sanctuary. This is the isolation phase of coercive control. He cut the wires to the outside world under the guise of protection. He convinced me that our success made people jealous and that we could only trust each other. "Your friends are toxic and don't have your best interests at heart," he would whisper. The silence in our home became a heavy, physical presence. We fell into a demand-withdraw pattern. I would reach for a connection, desperate for a kind word, and he would retreat into a stony, silent treatment that felt like emotional abandonment. He used silence to punish, guilt-trip, and pressure me into compliance, without ever having to engage in an honest conversation. I remember the silent dinners. The only sounds were the jangle of his keys and the clink of silver on porcelain. I would sit across from him, my heart pounding, trying to think of a safe topic. But in a house of 5,000 square feet, there was no safe ground. Every topic was a minefield. To the world, we were a power couple. In reality, I was experiencing a banal unhomeliness, the homelessness that exists even when you own the deed to the property. Receiving the silent treatment activates the same brain regions as physical pain. I wasn't being hit, but I was drowning in a sea of sorrow, feeling the social pain of being deliberately ignored by the person who promised to cherish me until death. There is a myth that financial abuse only happens to the poor. In my world, it was the weaponization of access. Stephen was a senior partner. We had millions in the bank. Yet, I lived on a weekly allowance. I know you're under a lot of stress, Haven, so why don't I just take care of the finances? I'll give you money each week for what you need, he said early in our marriage. It sounded like a relief then, but soon it became a financial leash. I had to justify every grocery receipt. If I bought a book he didn't approve of, he would call it emotional spending and remind me that I wasn't contributing to the household income. He sabotaged my employment by telling me my career was just a hobby and that it would be embarrassing for him if I were seen working for a competitor. This is how he took my economic power and used it to nurture my oppression. Even with my name on the accounts, I was nothing without him. Research shows that wives who are economically controlled face a significantly increased risk for poor mental health, with an adjusted odds ratio /BM-AOR of 4.89 for a diagnosed clinical condition. I was that statistic. I was a professional woman who had to ask for permission to buy new violin strings for our daughter. Stephen used the strategic weaponization of wealth to fund his own grandiose self-image while keeping me in a state of perpetual insecurity. The turning point didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the kitchen on a random Tuesday. My son, Leo, was 14. I asked him to help me with the dishes. He didn't even look up from his laptop. He looked at me with Stephen's exact patronizing and contemptuous eyes. Mom, stop being so dramatic. Dad's right. You're just looking for things to complain about because you're irrelevant, he said. In that moment, I saw the mirroring. My children weren't just witnessing a marriage, they were absorbing a curriculum of abuse. Leo was becoming the tyrant, and my daughter, Zoya, was becoming the ghost, the symptom bearer of our dysfunctional family unit. This is the intergenerational transmission of trauma. By staying for the kids, I had inadvertently taught them that women are accessories to be managed rather than humans to be respected. I realized my sabar wasn't a virtue. It was a vicious cycle of oppression that was being passed down to the next generation. Kids are sophisticated conflict analysts. They had detected the nonverbal anger and stonewalling, even when we went behind closed doors. They had seen Stephen depersonalize me, treating me like furniture or a mere accessory to his life. And now, my own son was treating me the same way. The invisible wounds I had tried so hard to hide were now bleeding through my children's words. I looked in the mirror on my 60th birthday. Stephen had thrown a lavish party at the country club. He gave a speech about our 30 years of bliss. He looked like a saint. I looked like a hollowed-out shell. I realized that marriage doesn't fail. People do. Stephen failed to be a partner because his narcissistic entitlement made him believe the world, and I owed him glory. He viewed our family as an extension of himself, something to be used for image-keeping rather than loved for itself. And I had failed myself. I had stayed in a distressing marriage, rationalizing my suffering as a religious duty or a sign of moral strength. I had internalized the blame, assuming that if I were just a little more patient, a little more serving, he would finally see me. But you cannot fix a man who doesn't believe he is broken. I saw the scar hypothesis in my own eyes. The way my depression had eroded my self-esteem over 12 years, creating a self-perpetuating reciprocal process of worthlessness. I was 60 years old, and I didn't know who I was without Stephen's permission to exist. I spent years asking for patience. but I was asking for the wrong thing. They tell us to be silent and servile. They tell us that Allah loves those who never say a word of displeasure. But they are misinterpreting the word. Sabar, true patience, means standing firm upon righteousness and obedience to Allah. It does not mean being a doormat for an abuser's ego. If your patience is facilitate zulm, oppression, then it is not a virtue. It is an injustice against yourself. Allah does not approve of oppression. He has forbidden it for himself and made it haram between us. To the woman sitting in a house that smells of cleaning products and suppressed anger, your self-worth is not a bargaining chip for a quiet life. Justice is not just the absence of a punch. It is the presence of opportunity and the elimination of barriers to your potential. A marriage without respect, trust, and safety is not a relationship. It is a long-term funeral. I am leaving the museum today. I am leaving the weeping concrete and the equidistant forks. I am taking my reality back. I am choosing a new dawn, a new commitment, a new life. Because it is better to be alone and whole than married and hollow. It is never too late to stop being a symptom and start being a soul. I spent 30 years learning a lesson I should have known in the first. Marriage doesn't fail. People fail to love. And you cannot be the only one holding up a roof that was meant to be shared.